Imagine losing every cell tower, every internet cable, every communication network, all at once. Most countries would go offline completely, but one system kept working. Not underground, not underwater, above Earth. Starlink. In just a few years, it's gone from an ambitious space project to something governments, militaries, airlines, ships, and millions of ordinary people now rely on every single day. So why is everyone suddenly talking about Starlink? It was actually built to solve. The internet, as most of the world uses it, was never really designed for this. It runs through fiber optic cables, buried underground, stretching across entire continents. It runs through cell towers, standing every few miles, relaying signals to your phone. It runs through undersea cables, hundreds of them, physically resting on the ocean floor, carrying almost all international internet traffic. All of that infrastructure works incredibly well, most of the time. But it's physical, and physical things can break, get cut, get bombed, or simply never get built in the first place. An undersea cable gets snagged by a ship's anchor. An entire country can lose connectivity for days. A war destroys cell towers. A whole region goes dark. A remote village, hundreds of miles from the nearest city, might just never get cable internet at all. Running a wire there was never worth the cost. That's the gap Starlink was built to fill. Here's the actual idea behind it, in the simplest terms. Instead of laying cables across the ground, put the network in the sky. Specifically, in low Earth orbit, a few hundred kilometers up, much closer to Earth than traditional satellites ever flew. Traditional satellite internet used to be slow and laggy. Those satellites sat tens of thousands of kilometers away, in a much higher orbit. Starlink's satellites orbit close enough that the signal delay drops dramatically, closer to what you'd get from a regular cable connection. And instead of a handful of giant satellites, Starlink uses thousands of small ones, working together as a single network. As of this year, there are more than 7,800 Starlink satellites in orbit. That's roughly 2/3 of every active satellite currently in space. From any country, any company, combined. 10 million people now pay for the service, across more than 150 countries and territories. So that's the technology. Here's why governments specifically have gotten so interested in it. Ukraine is the clearest example. Within weeks of Russia's 2022 invasion, roughly 38,000 Starlink terminals were deployed across the country. Ukraine's military has used the network to keep command centers connected, to coordinate logistics, to run its fleet of drones on the front line. It became part of the country's wartime infrastructure, not just a consumer product. That dependence has also shown its risks. Starlink has gone down more than once during the war. One outage knocked out connectivity across the entire front line. For over 2 hours, combat operations had to continue without live video feeds. Ukraine's own military commander later said the incident exposed a real vulnerability, one worth diversifying away from, if possible. Natural disasters tell a similar story. Without the war, hurricanes and earthquakes knock out local infrastructure. Starlink terminals can be flown in and set up within hours, restoring connectivity long before cell towers or cables get rebuilt. Remote regions, ones no telecom company ever found profitable to wire, now have a real broadband option for the first time. The military and aviation side of this has grown fast too. The U.S. Department of Defense signed a contract for a military version of the network. It's called Starshield. The contract is worth $537 million. That business alone is projected to bring in over $3 billion in revenue this year. More than 2,500 aircraft are already using Starlink for onboard internet. Lufthansa alone signed a deal covering 850 aircraft. British Airways' parent company signed one covering another 500. Cruise ships and cargo vessels have adopted it at a similar pace. Traditional maritime internet used to be slow, expensive, and unreliable, far from shore. Over 40 million passengers used Starlink on ships and planes last year alone. Naturally, none of this went unnoticed by Starlink's competitors or by other governments. Amazon has its own constellation, recently rebranded from Project Kuiper to Amazon Leo. The first production satellites are already in orbit. A commercial launch is targeted for later this year. Amazon faces a real deadline pressure here too. Its FCC license requires half its satellites launched by mid-2026. As of this spring, it had barely over 200 in orbit, well behind that pace. Europe's OneWeb, now merged with the French satellite company Eutelsat, tells a different story. It's already deployed over 600 satellites of its own, focused more on government and enterprise customers than everyday consumers. China is building not one, but two competing networks, known as Guowang and Qianfan. Combined, they're planning for well over 10,000 satellites, aimed largely at China's own domestic market and its partner countries abroad. The European Union has its own project too. It's called IRIS², a roughly €10 billion constellation, backed by member states across the bloc. Officials frame it explicitly around something they call digital sovereignty. The idea that Europe shouldn't have to depend on a single American company for critical government communications. That phrase, digital sovereignty, is really the whole story behind this competition. This was never just an internet business. It's infrastructure that entire militaries, airlines, and governments now depend on. And no country wants that infrastructure controlled entirely by someone else. Which brings us to the part of this story that gets talked about a lot less. Start with the sky itself. Astronomers have raised alarms for years about the sheer number of satellites now crossing the night sky. One major astronomical body found something concerning. The added brightness from mega-constellations could make the sky 2 to 3 times brighter than natural levels. In some conditions, that interferes directly with ground-based telescopes trying to observe faint, distant objects. Radio astronomy has similar concerns. These satellites transmit on frequencies that can overlap with the ones scientists use to listen for signals from deep space. Space debris is the other physical worry. More satellites in orbit means more junk if something malfunctions. A genuinely crowded low Earth orbit raises a long-term risk. The risk of collisions creating even more debris. Some scientists have warned about this exact chain reaction for decades. It has a name, Kessler syndrome, where enough debris eventually makes parts of orbit unusable for anyone. Then there's the control question. This is the one that's generated the most actual controversy. Starlink isn't run by a government or a committee. It's run by one company, under the direction of one person. That's created some genuinely uncomfortable moments. In 2022, Musk reportedly declined to activate Starlink coverage near Russian-occupied Crimea. This happened during a planned Ukrainian naval drone operation. He cited his own concerns about the risk of escalating the war. Whatever you think of that specific decision, it illustrates something governments have had to reckon with directly. A private individual made a call that affected a sovereign country's military operation in real time, based on his own judgment. A former FCC chairwoman put the underlying concern plainly. One company controls close to 2/3 of everything currently in orbit. That same company carries a large share of global satellite internet traffic. Her point was simple. Economies generally don't benefit from that kind of concentration. None of this means Starlink is secretly malicious, or that the technology itself is the problem. It means a huge amount of critical global infrastructure now runs through a system where a handful of people, sometimes just one person, can make decisions that ripple out to entire countries. That's exactly the tension driving Europe, China, and Amazon to build their own competing networks as fast as they possibly can. Nobody wants to be permanently dependent on someone else's satellites. Not for something this important. So where does this actually leave us? Starlink isn't replacing the internet you already know. It's not going to tear out the fiber cables under your street. It's creating a second one, running in parallel, above rather than below. And for the first time in history, the world's communications may depend a little less on cables buried beneath our feet, and a little more on satellites orbiting above our heads.